So I just finished Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo, which is a pretty widely, highly regarded game, and you know what, it's pretty good. The game didn't make an excellent first impression on me because one of the first things that I noticed about it was that the pre-rendered CG visuals haven't aged very well, as pre-rendered CG from this area in time tends not to. I think that pixel art from the same console generation in the same couple years tends to look a lot better in retrospect than this sort of thing does. Not that the CG in this game looks terrible or anything, but it's not ideal. I also noticed that it has really detailed animations, things like Diddy Kong crouching down before jumping and that sort of thing. But this can be a bit of a double-edged sword because it can lead in some cases to the feel of the platforming just seeming a little bit off. It makes it feel like the characters take longer to respond to your inputs than they do, because even though Diddy will actually start moving upward in his jump as soon as you hit the button, the sprite animation will look like it's crouching down first even though he actually is jumping immediately. So it creates this little bit of a disconnect where you think that there's a little bit of a delay between you pushing a button and the character jumping, when actually that disconnect doesn't exist at all. But this discrepancy between what it looks like and what it is creates its own little disconnect, which you can get around if you pay close attention or just play the game long enough to kind of get used to this, but it's still not ideal, obviously. That said, the game has a really good sense of flow in spite of this fact. You've got a really good feeling of momentum, characters will bounce around in ways that just feel nice to control. It's just generally a very smooth and fluid game to play. And it also has really tight level design and physics that take full advantage of this fluid platforming, where you'll find that if you know what you're doing and you respond properly to threats, then you'll be able to make it all the way through a level without having to ever stop running to the right. Because the way that the platforms and the enemies and the obstacles are spaced is set up in such a way that they're the correct distance apart from each other to just very fluidly move from one to the next without having to slow down ever, if you know what you're doing. And that's very cool and fun, and it's obviously very rewarding for skilled players. I'm not at all surprised to note that this game does have a very active, very passionate speedrunning community. But the game doesn't leave new players out to dry either. This game is also really fun on a first playthrough when you're not that good at it, because every level introduces some new gimmick mechanic, some new idea. Each one is memorable and has a core concept that it's built around that makes it interesting on a first run through. And then the tightness of the platforming and the precision of the level design will allow each level to continue to impress as you get better and better at it, because it will support your increase in skill. So what we have is a game that effectively caters very well both to new and experienced players, which is great. Love it. I love it. Perfect. Good job. The game also has a lot of visual and aesthetic charm to it. I know that I said that the pre-rendered visuals don't age particularly well, and that's true, but a lot of the design work does, in spite of the fact that it is kinda ugly early 90s CG. King K. Rool and the Critters are a lot of fun to just watch in action. They're really charming as villains. There's a lot of nice variety in the level designs where you start out in a jungle and move your way through temples and volcanoes and factories and end up on a ship. It does a good job of making the world feel kind of expansive and varied, like you're really making your way around this island rather than just staying in one place the whole time, which is nice. And King K. Rool is one of the most immediately visually appealing villains I've ever seen. I can 100% understand why people were so upset not to see him come back in Donkey Kong Country Returns. I would love to see more of this guy, because he's very charming, very likable, very funny to look at, you know? Overall, it's a really well-made, well-put-together, well-thought-out game that is one of the better Super Nintendo platformers I've played. I'm looking forward to playing Donkey Kong's number 2 and 3 sometime, eventually. This one gets an 8 out of 10.
It'll be great. Yeah, I said, it'll be great.
And you can play it pretty easily, either via emulation or finding a used copy of it somewhere, or if you manage to lay your hands on a SNES Classic, the little mini with the preloaded games. Donkey Kong Country is one of the games preloaded onto it, so you can play it through that. And even if it wasn't, it's actually extremely easy to hack one of those and put more games onto it. So, like, it doesn't have Donkey Kong Country 2 or 3, but I went ahead and just slapped them on in there, because it is so easy to add more games to this thing. Like, it is ridiculously easy. So yeah, I'd recommend checking it out and playing through it however you find yourself able to. It really is a very fun game. Lots of cool little ideas between the barrel cannons and different animal buddies to ride on. Just really a class act of Super Nintendo platformers.